Slow down, lay your burden down.
Hey, welcome to Divergent Paths with Dan Dunford. I'm the host, Dan Dunford. Thanks for listening to the show this week. I really appreciate it, and I hope you continue to have me in your earballs as you go about your day, on the train or at work or whatever it is. I hope you continue enjoying the interviews. This week, my guest is Danny Abosch, who is a musical theater composer, lyricist, producer, writer. Am I missing something? I might be missing something. Even if I am missing something, think of that job and he probably does it. And he probably does it very well. Danny's a really great guy, really wonderful composer and writer. And we had a really fun conversation talking through a lot of nitty-gritty stuff with writing musicals. And, in some points we just kind of nerd out about them, which is fun as well. So, yeah. We had a really, really fun chat. So much fun, actually, that I ended up forgetting my microphones at his apartment and had to get them from him the next week, which, yeah, way to go me. Very professional. So, Danny has a number of things that you can check out, musicals that have been produced and projects upcoming. So, I could have used a number of things for this week's track on featured music from the artist, as I normally do, but I decided to go in a slightly different direction. We very briefly mentioned a song that, unbeknownst to Danny, in advance at least, was featured on the Lifetime Network show Dance Moms, and I thought it would be funny and fun to put that on the end of the episode today. I mean, still a good fun song, no matter what it was used for. But the song's called "Nothing More Annoying Than a Man," as heard on Lifetime's Dance Moms, which is awesome. If you enjoy the podcast this week, or any week really, please hop over to iTunes or Stitcher and subscribe, or leave a review. I think I have one review on iTunes, so if you have something really bad to say, maybe don't, but if you have something good to say and you like the podcast, I can keep begging, or you can just go put a review down. It's up to you. That's really needy. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Danny. He's awesome. Thank you. You're awesome. Bye.
Slow down.
But all right. So part of the thing is with this is I generally err on the side of under preparing before I talk to someone, because you can get a general idea from I'll glance at someone's website and okay, cool, I have a couple key touchstones, but I did one with someone that I was very familiar with their work, and I was just like, what do? I have too many things. It was 2 hours of just vague nebula. It was fine. It was okay, but I ended up redoing the whole thing with the guy because it was just really vague and nebulous. Good, but unfocused, Yeah. Had to redo the thing. I had bring notes and stuff. But
Yeah, it seems like there would be some benefit to like you learning at the same time that your audience is learning.
Yeah, and if I'm not coming in with a list of questions, like that way, like we can, you can go off onto tangents.
Yeah.
With
I think tangents are sometimes the most interesting
exactly. I mean,
parts of
I've had so many instances where I didn't like have something came up in the process of the conversation where like there was no way I would have thought of that ahead of time and to write it down. And if I had been like, here are my 10 questions for you, what's it like being a such and such in New York City in 2015 or 16, etc.
You get vague answers.
When I initially like Trevor Viola.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. First was a guest, and then like we were talking, and all of a sudden this whole thing about like performance injuries came up, and I had no idea that he had all these issues. And so we like spent 10, 12, 15 minutes talking about like dealing with performance injuries. And afterwards he was like, yeah, I don't think I've ever like talked through that in like 10 years.
Huh.
Like, it's just never a thing that you really discuss.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing.
That makes sense.
But anyway, so Danny, thanks for sitting down with me.
Of course.
So, like we were just saying about like the learning while talking, I'm, you're a musical theater composer, lyricist, songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
Am I missing something?
Well, I dabble in arranging, I dabble in producing, I dabble in a lot of things.
And orchestrating and all these things that go into that. It's such a huge thing. But I love musicals. That's not any kind of a groundbreaking statement from a person. Like most people, even if they don't like musical theater as a genre, there's something that they like. Even if it's I'm blanking on an example, but even if it's Spider-Man, which I think it's garbage, but that's just my personal opinion. But there's usually something there, whether it's the visuals, the choreography, the whatever
it was visually spectacular.
Exactly.
Whatever you want to say about it, it looked amazing.
Yeah. Exactly. In that specific instance, when Spider-Man wasn't falling and killing people. But like it's such a huge grandiose thing. It kind of comes from that old school opera buffet. Huge productions. Grandiose songs, big casts. Yeah. And now. But like I was get back to what I was saying. Like I don't really know that much about how that all works. Yeah. And you've had experience doing a lot of this stuff. You've had things produced, you've had shows produced of your own, and that that's something I just am like. It seems like a hard life. There's all these kids coming out of NYU who are like, yes, musicals and writing, and then they just like. Disappear. Yeah, no, that's real. So what kind of when you're doing in your zone, let's say, what does that really look like when you're like really writing?
Sure. So I mean, I always say that like I write things that I would want to hear or to see. So I sort of write to my own taste, and I sort of, the thing that excites me about a project is the thing that I try to keep track of when I'm writing. So I think sometimes it's like very easy to drift away from the thing that got you excited about a project. But for me, that's something that's important, is to, really keep that in mind while I'm writing. But so what does it look like? I mean, it's usually me starting with that nugget of an idea and riffing on that until I have something where I go, okay, I like that, and then I expand that a little bit more. It's usually at the keyboard. Sometimes I'll start with words first, sometimes I won't. Usually I'll have at least the title first of a song. Are
there pluses or minuses to starting with words, or vice versa? I mean, like, is it just kind of depends on the day?
Yeah, it depends on the day, it depends on the lyricist, it depends on the song, the moment in the show. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it. I find that sometimes it's helpful with certain types of songs, like with, for example, patter songs. It's really easier if the lyrics come first. Whereas sometimes for other kinds of songs, like, like a lush romantic ballad, you might want the music to come first. Or sometimes what I actually like to do most often is to start with a piece of one, then do a piece of the other, and then work from there. So instead of saying, here's a wholesale lyric, it's done, just set it to music, I'll say, here's a fragment of a lyric, here's 3 lines of a lyric. Let's musically find our way around that, and then see where that goes. I just, it used to be more like in the golden age of Broadway, you would see like an entire lyric finished first, or an entire musical composition finished first.
And back then it was almost like a friggin' assembly line.
Yeah.
Of, these guys were pumping out shows, at a rate that seems impossible in the 21st century. Yeah. I mean, you see or let me use an example, like a show like Urinetown.
Yeah.
Which, people have different opinions on it, but I really enjoy it. I like playing it. It's a lot of fun for me.
Yeah.
But those guys haven't been heard from since. And this is...
Well, they've done a couple other things. But
in some ways. Like, this is like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
The show was, all over the place and won everything. But...
yeah, I mean, they actually just did one that was, I think, at the O'Neill. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they have been doing other things. I don't think they've had a Broadway show since Urinetown, but
right.
So
I guess that's what I mean.
From the general public's perspective, they might, for someone who doesn't follow this as closely as I do, they might not have heard from them recently.
Yeah. What kind of got you into doing this? I mean, it's a pretty specific track, and one that I don't want to sound like too down, but it's one with a lot of attrition, let's say.
Yeah.
If you hit it and then you're a rock star, even if your show only even if it's only like 30 days,
yeah,
it's for that 30-day period.
They say that you can't make a living at this, but you can make a killing.
Yep. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, how did I start? Well, I've loved musicals my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up singing them, being in them, studying them. And at some point, like I actually started out, like I think most people do that end up doing this, acting in musicals, like in high school. And at some point, like in the middle of high school, I sort of realized I was more interested in how a musical was constructed than I was in performing it. So like I was like in these shows and I would hate having to rehearse them, but I would love getting to like study the score because I like had the score then because I was doing it. And I was so fascinated with how these things were constructed and the similarities between other things. And you start, once you know a lot of musicals, you start to notice these patterns that, there's always this kind of song that happens here. And there's always, certain structure about when a song has to happen versus a scene, so there's like things that you sort of notice. And I just found that I was really fascinated with those things and sort of intuitively understood them too.
And this is starting in high school that you're already starting to think about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wrote my first musical in high school.
No, even. Yeah. Oh man,
it wasn't very good, but but I did write one.
Well, that kind of comes
right.
So yeah, I mean that's. I don't know. Is it particularly early? I feel like if you want to get into that kind of a thing, it kind of. I mean, I'm sure there are people who come to it late and have success, but there's so much there. It's such a huge encyclopedia at this point. After almost 100, roughly 100 plus years, there's such an encyclopedia of material.
Yeah,
studying that stuff and becoming so familiar with how it all fits together. There's just so much there.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like if you look at the greats of this. Some of them started really early. Sondheim had West Side Story in his early 20s. Right. Stephen Schwartz had Godspell in his early 20s. And then there are others like Alan Menken went to dental school first and then figured out, no, I should actually be writing musicals. So you see everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think these days it's getting earlier because it's such a phenomenon now in a way that it didn't used to be. Every high school has a musical, so you're exposed to it very early on, and you find and it's also more of it's just more in the zeitgeist now than it used to be.
Yeah, it was always. I mean, I remember talking to my dad about it. You know, my dad's not really musical at all, but when he was in high school, like in the late 70s, early 80s, I mean, he did musical. I mean, he was in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown.
I was in that too once.
Yeah, see, I mean, he was Snoopy.
I was Linus.
And you know, it's something that like everyone can look at it and be like, yeah, okay, I recognize that part. You know, whether it was in it or they beat up kids who were in the musical, or they were one of the kids who got beat up for being in the musical. But nowadays, you know, it's such a huge part. You know, it's become such a part of American culture that it's almost swung around into this is, if you can do this, you're cool in a weird sort of way.
I was exactly just going to say that it has shifted back to people being beat up because they were in the musical to now it's the cool thing to do.
I mean, I'm not in any way really advocating for watching the show Glee, but in some ways, like it especially in its first season, it touches on a lot of those things, like
it totally
having this kind of a talent. You know, it's getting more to the point where, you know, if you have that kind of a talent, people want you to do it, and there's people who will watch you do it.
Yeah, I actually think even earlier than Glee, High School Musical was the one that really sort of made a difference in this. I mean, because it's also like at its core, the plot is about a jock who does a musical and is cool, you know. So like it's that was sort of, I think, the one thing you can sort of look at and
it's a little bit of a
mid
20 early 21st century tipping point, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, they just did they all had the 10th anniversary get together. Oh
man, that's crazy!
Like last week.
It's been 10 years.
Yeah, it's been 10 years. Well, I mean, yeah. Anyway,
I guess it has been about 10 years.
We could be done talking about High School Musical. Although I was definitely a huge fan of it then.
Yeah. I never loved it. I never loved Glee, but I appreciate what they've done for musical theater.
You can not like something, but appreciate what it stands for in the culture.
Totally.
You know, there are definitely, it's particularly in the musical theater world, there are things like that for me. Like I appreciate what you're doing, but you know, I guess for me the example would be Rent. I'm just not a huge fan of that musical.
Sure.
But I definitely appreciate like what it did in that in you know, like just having a straight up rock show.
Totally.
That's great. I mean,
totally groundbreaking.
It's groundbreaking.
Yeah.
It's been in, you know, even right now you can see a bunch of different shows that, you know, owe part of their success to that show. So anyway, back to you. So you're in high school. You're already kind of writing and doing all this stuff. I mean, were you from a musical family? You know, did they really, you know?
Yes and no. I mean, so my grandparents on my dad's side were professional musicians. They were both in the Colorado Symphony Orchestra for about 40 years. So yes, although both of my parents are not anyway involved in the arts, so they're just, you know, totally non-musical. So I sort of did come from musical lineage, but not directly.
I mean, but you know, was it something where you're like, you were like, oh, this is something I want to do, and they, you know, were they not, what's the word you know, was it a situation where they're like really saying, yes, do this,
yeah,
or was it kind of a weird thing?
They were always supportive of it. It wasn't necessarily something where I was brought up with it. Like I think when you listen to a lot of other musical theater writers talk about how they got started, they'll say things like, oh yeah, well I grew up in this because my father was a director and he was always taking me to the shows he was directing and blah, blah, blah. That was never the case for me. We really didn't go to musicals unless I said, I'm dying to see this musical, will you take me? Which did happen. But they were always supportive. They were never like, no, we don't want you to go into musical theater, which, you know, there are a lot of parents who say that.
Well, when it comes down to it,
That's a good credit.
like we already alluded to, whether you're a writer or an actor or singer, triple threat, whatever you want to, whatever you are, like you can be really good and it's still not good enough.
Right.
It's a hard thing to try and do.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely impossible.
It's really insane. I mean, it's hard enough that Marvin Hamlish wrote a show about it. Like,
Yeah.
and for like a freelance musician like myself, I actually did 2 productions of it, a little bit outside the city earlier this year. But it's a really weird, it's a weird point of view to be like playing for these regional houses like as a freelancer and be like, oh yeah, this is actually my life. This is like, and they end up with the final couple people for the chorus line, and you're like, can I just be one of those people? Like, it's a weird thing.
Yeah.
So where you grew up in
The Chicago area, suburb called Deerfield.
right? I feel like we talked about this
Yeah,
before
I
because
think we
my family's from the Chicago area as well. And of course Chicago's a great, that area is a great, if you're into the arts, there's always opportunities to see something. Every show is going to come there at some point. Like, it's not a city that things really pass by.
Right.
It might not be there all the time, like in New York, but it'll be there.
Right. Yeah, totally. I think, unfortunately, I was like a little bit too far north to like get really the benefit of that. I mean, we did go to see like Broadway and Chicago tours that were in town, but like only once in a while. It's not like we really didn't go downtown unless there was a specific reason to go downtown.
Yeah. Well, why would you?
Right. I mean, and there were actually some closer theaters too, like the Marriott Lincolnshire. That was, we saw shows there more than we saw them downtown. But I mean, it certainly didn't hurt that I grew up next to a thriving big city.
Yeah, because even it kind of even on the outskirts, like things trickle down, like because from the center hub, like it's that way in New York too. You have lots of stuff in the surrounding areas as well. White Plains and Long Island and New Jersey. So how did you kind of, so you go to school for musical theater writing?
Well, I did that for grad school. I first went to undergrad at the University of Michigan for music education, and then did my master's at NYU in musical theater writing. I mean, I basically always knew I wanted to move to New York, even from like when I was a kid. I just always knew I would end up here, and I love everything about it. And I was sort of a New Yorker born in the wrong place,
right?
But so, grad school was both an excuse to go to grad school and to move to
just be in New York. Yeah. Well, and it's for a lot of musicians in particular. You have people who move to New York after school, and it's hard. Like as if you go to school here, you're basically giving yourself a leg up because you're in the auspices of an institution that'll kind of take care of you, to some extent, and still like kickstart your career while you're still in school. If you make that decision, you can do that fairly, not easily, but it is a little bit easier than just like moving here out of nowhere and being like, this is my big shot.
Right. Right. Standing in Times Square with your suitcase and going, I'm here.
God.
What now?
Hello, every movie ever.
Yeah. Right. I mean, so it's kind of exactly why I didn't do that. I thought that grad school would be sort of a good way to get acclimated here, and I think it was.
And of course, NYU has one of the best programs in the country.
Yeah. That's sort of really the only program in the country for musical theater writing, at least the only degree program.
Okay, I see. I didn't.
I mean,
there's
other
MFA programs in a lot of different places.
Yeah, and there's the BMI workshop that is great for up and coming musical theater writers, but you don't get a degree from it. So
right,
NYU is really unique in that regard.
Well, so like, what is it like being the low guy on the totem pole when you're starting out in New York? Like,
it is tough. It's. I mean, as I said earlier, it's really, you can't make a living, you can make a killing. So I've not succeeded at making either of those yet. But I found things along the way that to sustain that, and also to find things that I maybe didn't expect that I would be interested in, and do that. This whole thing with producing a new orchestration series at the Musical Theater Factory is not something I really expected to find myself doing, but I was certainly happy to do it when the opportunity arose. So but I mean, there's also freelance stuff that I sort of pick up here and there of people need a song for a movie, just like a one-off thing, and I'll write one. And, there's like things like that sort of make it a little bit easier.
So have you done composing outside of the musical theater genre?
Not much, although it sort of, I guess, depends on what you define as musical theater. Like, I have written standalone songs and songs from movies that aren't necessarily musicals, and some of my music has weirdly ended up on like TV shows as underscore and like really random places. There was one I didn't even know about actually on Dance Moms that I don't watch Dance Moms. So
good. First of all,
so someone called me and was like, "Your song's on Dance Moms." I was like, "What? No, it's not." And then it was.
How does that work? I mean, do you do like a one-off thing where you sell a song to an organization and they can just use it as they see fit for whatever they want?
Kind of. It's more like you license it. So I work with a company that licenses certain compositions for things like that, where like, if a commercial needs some music or a TV show needs some music or things like that, they can license it without actually selling all of the rights to it.
Okay.
And then you get royalties through your PRO minus ASCAP.
Right. And I'm sure, Dance Mom's got you a nice big, like, $50,000 check.
No, not nearly that big, but
so that's not how music works? Okay.
I wish it were that easy.
Well, that's interesting because a lot of, I was talking to another friend of mine who, he often advises, he's a composer and musician, but he often advises people about the whole licensing process. Most musicians don't have any idea how it works, particularly composers, and it's so easy to just get screwed over or not even get screwed over, but just you won't get properly compensated for all this work you've done. I
mean, unfortunately, if you run into this field expecting proper compensation,
or just compensated at all. Really, I guess is the point I'm making.
It's unfortunately there are a lot of elements of this where the compensation is not what it should be. Mm-hmm. I mean, in theatrical writing is sort of unique in itself in that playwrights own their work, which is not the case in a lot of other industries. Like in Hollywood, usually you write a script and then you sell it. Yeah. And then, you get a nice big check up front, but then you don't get the royalties. Then you don't get to own your work.
You get your $60,000 for a script you write, and then they just kind of can cut it up however they want.
Right. And so that's why we sort of, playwrights made sort of a deal with the devil in saying, we want to own and control our work, and in exchange for that, we're not going to be employees, so we don't have a union, and we don't have certain things, like we don't like fair compensation. I mean, it's basically like we traded our payment up front for the percentage of the royalty going forward.
Oh, okay. How's that worked out?
I think it is a good thing overall.
Yeah, and in some ways, like, not only are you getting the monetary percentage, but you get more of a say in what people do to you. What people, I mean, it's, you say it's a deal with the devil, but it's also making sure your artistic vision isn't completely torn to shreds.
And that's the thing that's most important to me. I mean, I don't think any musical theater writer got in this for the money.
Right. I mean,
we got in this because we love the work. We love what musical theater can do, and it's important to us that we have a certain amount of artistic control over the work that we do. And to most people, including myself, that's more important than getting a large check for it. So,
Well, I mean, well, there you go.
yeah, but then you have the problem of not earning a living, and you also,
you're like, but where are the
frankly,
large checks going to come from,
Right.
then?
And you also, frankly, have the issue of being the only group in this business that doesn't have a union.
It doesn't have a union.
You know,
Yeah, you got to get your
musicians have
life
a union,
insurance from someone
stagehands have a
else.
union, actors have a union, playwrights don't have a union. We
Yeah.
have a guild, but guild is not a union.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same weight.
Right.
Okay. So, you know, you've been fortunate enough to have had some success with some of the things you've written over the past few years. When did you move to New York?
2011,
Okay.
right during Hurricane Irene.
Oh, I remember Hurricane Irene.
Right.
That was Irene hit like in between. Like I moved to New York in 2010 and then was gone for a year, and then like Irene hit right in the middle.
Yeah.
I came back just in time for Sandy, but
Sandy was much worse.
much worse.
Irene was overhyped.
Yeah, definitely.
But still not fun driving a U-Haul during it.
I'm sure. God. Well, growing up in Florida on the Gulf Coast, I had a lot of experience with hurricanes.
I bet.
So when New Yorkers are all like, "Oh, hurricanes," I'm like, get a grip. Like, I've lived through a bunch of these,
Right.
and they're not a joke. But what you're going to get is so much less than what. Anyway, enough about hurricanes. Hurricanes with Dan and Danny. That's my new podcast.
Be a spin-off. Get it? Spin-off?
Yep. Jesus.
Terrible. Moving on.
But so, like I was saying, you've had some success since you moved here, in some different fields. Well, what kind of do you see as like your, what your biggest accomplishments have been like in this? You've been here for 5 years. That's like no time.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people who have been here for longer and are still dealing with begging friends to do readings
Right.
in a black box theater
Right.
in Flatbush, kind of a thing.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, I think, like you said, the fact that I'm getting produced at all is an accomplishment in this business. You know, there are a lot of my friends, frankly, are not there yet. And I'm not really where I would like to be eventually either. But I think that I'm making good progress for the 4.5 years I've been here.
Well, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, if you say, "Hey, I've had this and this and this done," when these people who are maybe in the same age range or same experience level as me haven't, like if you do that, you're just going to get stuck.
Yeah.
Or people will hate you.
Right. Right.
So one of the things that has come out of this is you had an off-Broadway show produced, and it went on tour.
Yeah.
You can even find the cast recording on Spotify and iTunes.
Yeah.
Because I've looked.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the name. You're gonna have to remember.
It's
remind
called
me the
Fancy
name.
Nancy the musical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, like off-Broadway and Broadway, they run differently.
Yeah.
Obviously the pay is different. The length of time can be different.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like a thing like Fantastics will run forever.
Yeah,
And
it's
as they keep
interesting.
getting money off-Broadway, but while Dr. Zhivago closed after a month and a half, kind of a thing
Right.
on Broadway. So what kind of, how does, I have very little knowledge of how that like all kind of works. How did that pan out or not pan out? How did that kind of come together for your show?
Sure. I mean, so I was pretty lucky in the sense that I got that pretty quickly after I moved here. I mean, it was the summer of, I moved here in 2011 and this happened in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty quickly. Basically the way it happened was this theater company was looking for an orchestrator for one of their shows. And I had, back when I actually still lived in Michigan, I had applied to be the orchestrator for this because I was moving to New York and, I was looking for work, and I submitted a demo of my show Placebo, basically just as a demo of my orchestration work, not as a demo of my compositions. And they said, you know what? And actually, I think that the schedule didn't work out because it was like when they needed this, it was like my first semester of grad school at NYU, and that was going to like be a disaster. So that didn't work out. But they were like, hey, when you come to New York, give us a call anyway, because we actually really liked this Placebo demo. They weren't going to produce that because they were focused on theater for young audiences, and Placebo was for adults. But they were like, we like your stuff. Come in and talk to us. And so I did, and it seemed like a fit. And so we talked about a few titles that I might want to do, and it happened that Fancy Nancy was one I was already familiar with, and it was high on my list because. So when I was in Michigan, I was doing music education, and I had student taught in an elementary school music for half a semester. And Fancy Nancy was a title that the kids really liked. So I was already familiar with it. I think we even sang a couple like songs that we made up about it. So I already knew about it. I had suggested it, and it happened that they had already begun the process of getting the rights for it. So the whole thing was a fit. I wrote an audition song basically on spec to see if it was a fit, and they loved it, and it stayed in the show. It's the opening number of the show. Anyone Can Be Fancy, and so it just sort of was off to the races from there. And they paired me with my collaborator on it, Susan DeLallo, who I had also sort of been familiar with her work because I had seen her fantastic show Iron Curtain previously. It had been off Broadway, and I just thought it was like the funniest thing I'd ever seen. But I didn't know her at all. I just knew that show. So when they suggested her, I was like, hell yes. And we ended up really hitting it off, and we're great friends. And so it was really great, but also really unusual. I mean, like that's not a story that I hear very often of happening. So that's why I say I got pretty lucky with it.
Well, I mean, a buddy of mine, trombone player, buddy of mine named Rick, he always says, or he said this to me one time, and I thought it was really appropriate, is, that first call might be luck, but getting the call back is on you. I mean,
for sure.
It might have been lucky that you sent them, that you just happened to be sending them example, orchestration examples of a show of your own.
Yeah.
But, you would put the work in, and then they liked it. It's it doesn't. A lot of guys, even guys who have been here for a long time, doing a lot, working, incredible, with incredible people, they'll always say like, "Oh, I was so lucky. I was so lucky." I hear these people talk about this, and I'm, 30, 40 years younger, and I'm like, how is that luck? You worked your ass off, and sure, like maybe a small part of it was luck, but what it comes down to is you worked hard.
Yeah, and I also really believe that the work you do, even if that particular project isn't a success, can lead to other things. And I think that's been true for me. I mean, as I just mentioned, Placebo got me Fancy Nancy, and now Fancy Nancy has gotten me my next project. So it keeps sort of giving in that sense.
So, obviously, Fancy Nancy is a for young audiences, and that was a really good fit for you coming out of the student teaching and doing all that stuff. What is it difficult to go back and forth between writing a show for young audiences and writing a show for adults? Because you think about it, like it's not something you see all that often. I mean, you would know better than me with teen lyrics, librettists and composers teaming up and writing both. I mean, like I said, you know better than me, but it seems like that would be a difficult jump to make.
Yeah, I mean, for some people, I actually don't find it difficult at all. I happen to just really like stuff that is family friendly. I mean, if I were to like list some of my favorite shows, a lot of them would be stuff that you'd probably call family friendly, Beauty and the Beast, Newsies, things like that. That you wouldn't call them necessarily kids shows, but they're like, you can bring your kids to them.
You can go. You can come in from Long Island and take your kids to see it on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, for sure. So I just that's material that speaks to me anyway. So it's not like I feel like I have to sacrifice the artistic integrity to do it. And I actually that's something I actually feel really strongly about with writing for kids, is that you shouldn't speak down to them and dumb stuff down for kids. I think that the people that do that usually fail.
Well, and when it comes down to it, kids are always way more aware of what you're doing than you think they are.
For sure.
Like,
I remember being a kid thinking that and rolling my eyes at some of the stuff that was supposed to be for my age group.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, how old are you now, if I can ask?
how old am I now?
Yeah.
I'm 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm 26 as well. Like we're a quote unquote adults, but yeah, I mean, I can. Yeah, it's a thing that at this point in our life, it's a thing that you remember. It's still there. Like it's not been that long ago.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I feel like I was the same person basically with, a few differences, but I remember, I mean, I was just always ready to handle more than people were letting me handle. So I remember that now when I write for those ages that, don't underestimate them. But I also, like, when you ask, is it hard to go back and forth? I actually feel like the going back and forth is what keeps me sane a little bit. Like it happened that while I was doing Fancy Nancy, I was also starting one of my thesis shows, which turned out to be this like really raunchy, dirty, story about the Mona Lisa coming to life and causing lots of chaos around Paris. But it's like filled with dick jokes and potty humor, and so like that was like almost my outlet while I was writing a kids show to like put all my dirty jokes there.
I remember reading a biography of Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, and apparently, of course, he has all, he's the kids author. Like his books stand up, and for some of the same reasons you mentioned, not speaking down to kids, but things that resonate no matter how old you are. But yeah, he was kind of a like he had some like some raunchy inclinations, but like I would imagine you would have to,
right? From the guy that wrote "Could You Would You" with a fox. I mean,
oh dare!
I still look at some of those lyrics and I'm like,
well, but like what kind of things do maybe for older audiences, what kind of things are you really into, writing?
Sure. Well, I mean, again, it goes back to like I want to write stuff that moves me, and that I would want to see if I was an audience member. So it's a lot of I don't know if there's like one particular pattern that I can say sort of defines all of the subject material that I am attracted to, but I would say that the one common thread is that it's all stuff that speaks to me emotionally. So, I mean, I can give you examples if that helps.
Sure.
Of the stuff I have
it's this is just kind of, I'm just trying to like formulate a little bit of a of a picture of what's going on here.
For sure. I mean, I can also say that I can identify a few patterns. I like stories that are universal. I like.
Well, of course, you were drawn to musical theater. Like so many of those things can be boiled down to a very universal. The best musicals boil down to something that speaks to huge audiences.
For sure, and I think there are certain musicals that really are so specific that they're not totally accessible to everyone, and other musicals where the specificity is what makes it universal.
Right.
To more than one group, which I think those musicals are brilliant. But yeah, accessibility actually is something that's huge to me. I really like work that is accessible, including musically accessible. I think that's really important. Like part of the thing with musical theater is that it's meant to be experienced in real time. So you're not sitting down with the score and studying it. You're not listening to a track several times. You experience it once and you have to get it once. And so it's the accessibility helps with that. If you have to hear it multiple times to get it, you've probably failed as a writer. I think, in my opinion. Others may disagree.
Well, I mean, that's kind of how it right now. Of course, we were talking a little bit about this before we started taping. The incredible success of Hamilton right now.
Yeah,
it's every single person who has seen it, as far as I've seen, has just been like, oh, it's over. This is the best musical of all time. And it while it is dealing in a little bit of that specificity, as far as like it's using a specific genre, that doesn't really pop up in this community that much. It's taking a story about white guys and casting it with a wide racial swath.
Yeah.
That sounds awkward. I need to find a better way to say that.
I think we all know what you meant.
But like a wide, a very here we go. This is better.
A diverse,
a far more diverse cast than you would generally see in a musical,
right?
And any musical,
right?
It's not just the one white or the one black guy in the chorus,
right?
Or the one black girl in among the dancers. It's an incredibly diverse cast, and even though like it's using these specific things, like it's everyone just loves it.
Yeah, and I think musically it's the same concept where you're taking a story that takes place in the 1700s and musically using the sounds of today.
Yeah, like who really knew about Alexander Hamilton before that musical? I mean, like right. What I would tell you is like, dual Aaron Burr, whatever.
Yeah,
that's what I would tell you.
Yeah. I think he's on one of the bills.
He's on the 20, I guess, or
it's the 10.
No, the 10. Yeah, there we go. It's but yeah, it's that those universal. Like you said, that's the specificity that is universal.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that's a great example of it. Yeah, you're taking something that happened, hundreds of years ago and making it accessible to people today.
I mean, that's something you can never lose sight of.
Right.
Otherwise, like, why are you doing it?
Right.
Or if you're not trying to share what you think or what you feel about things, if you can't share that with a crowd of several thousand people, like, well, you might be doing it wrong.
We should do another spin-off called "You Might Be Doing It Wrong."
That would be. Yeah, that's actually not bad. Probably, I feel like that might already exist.
Yeah,
that's a really catchy title,
right? Grab the domain.
All the catchy titles are already taken.
Yeah,
that's why I ended up with a clunky one like Divergent Paths.
Yeah, usually when you think of something great, it's already done. Actually, that's actually what Lynn said about Hamilton. He was like the second he thought of this idea of doing the founding fathers as a rap battle, he was like, oh, I'm sure someone's already done that. And then he Googled it and it was like, oh, maybe not. All right, I guess I have to do that.
This is my corner, get off. If you had to like describe like your specific style in in writing and in composing, how do you what would you think, how would you like explain that to someone who has never met you?
That is a great question. I would say maybe tuneful, memorable. I think one of the things I strive for is memorability. I think there's a lot of music these days in musical theater that's not that memorable, in my opinion. And the stuff I really respond to in other people's work is the stuff that really sticks with you.
You can hum it on your way out.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's something that is really important in my work. Memorable, accessible, tuneful.
This is something that I keep coming back to in a lot of my interviews is this idea of accessibility, because we're in a especially when you're dealing with like trying to be artists, it's a struggle to. I always say this. There's like a balancing act between, with good art, like, and accessibility. Like you have to make sure that you're not just like selling out and going lowest common denominator to grab as many ears as you can.
Right.
But you also have to make, you still have to speak to a large number of people. And it's.
Well, and from my perspective, if your work is such that you have to be a scholar to get it, then you're doing it wrong. You're sort of cutting off the ability for a connection with your audience. If people can't find their way into your work, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
But it's also like, I just don't think of it as lowest common denominator. And I think that partially goes back to the fact that I really just like shows that I think a lot of people would describe that way, like some of the Disney titles I mentioned, or some of the big mega hits from the 80s that everyone loves to shit on. But,
Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Right.
Yeah, that's funny. Like we were kind of saying earlier about people, the golden era of musical theater, people popping out shows like with alarming regularity. Kind of at least again, correct me if I'm wrong, but like Andrew Lloyd Webber is kind of the last of one of those guys who was like putting out these these mega smash hits like pretty regularly. And yeah, he had some clunkers. The sequel to Phantom of the Opera
Love
is
Never Dies.
Awful.
There's
some really great songs
great
in it,
music in it.
There's some really great music. I 100% agree.
I would have to agree. The show itself, it doesn't really work, but the score, some parts of it are phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, it died in West End, but
yeah, it's kind of a misnomer. Love Never Dies.
Yeah, love might not, but that musical sure did. But anyway. So, well, what, kind of like where are you going like right now? Like, I mean, this isn't going to come out for a bit, but you mentioned that you have some things that you're working on and some exciting stuff coming up for you.
Sure.
Because like you said, you might not be able to make a living. You do have a day job. Yeah, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Multiple.
Yeah, to pay the bills while you let your heart sing. In the evenings.
Yeah.
But I mean, don't we all at some on some level? But what's kind of coming down the pipe?
Sure. Well, I got a couple things. I'm firstly rewriting some old shows at the moment. Still working on Off the Wall, which is the one I mentioned about the Mona Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
We just did a workshop of that over the summer in LA, and so now we're like sort of in the process of like doing another draft and then doing hopefully another reading or workshop in New York. So that one is coming along. I also just got another commission for another TYA show, TYA Theater for Young Audiences.
Mm-hmm.
So this one's based on the Goosebumps series.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're as old as I am, so you probably remember these.
Here's my relationship to Goosebumps. Okay. I don't like horror, and when I was 6, those books terrified me. In addition, I was not allowed to read them.
Oh no!
Or watch the TV show.
Oh, yeah.
Although if you go back, you can see a very young Ryan Gosling in one of the episodes.
I just saw that. So I've been watching them for research, and they're conveniently all on Netflix. So it's
research,
yeah. I know, right? It's the best kind of research. But yeah, I was watching that one, and I was like, oh my god, that guy looks like a lot like Ryan Gosling. I was like, okay, that's funny. And then I kind of forgot about it. And I was like, wait, but that really looks like. And I watched the credits and was like, oh my god, that is. So
the funny thing is that episode is the only one I ever saw. Like,
really?
When I was a kid, yeah. Like it was at a friend's house, after school sometime, and that was on, and then I was at hanging out with somebody just a year or two ago, and she was like, yeah, let's put on Goosebumps. That's awesome. 90s. Woo! And it came on. I was like, I've seen this. Yeah. Also, Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
So you're working on working up a show based on Goosebumps.
Yes, I am.
So well, I mean, you're still in, like you mentioned, you're still in the kind of early phases of that, right?
Yeah, very early.
So, well, what does that, how does that work? What do you, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of research.
An existing property,
yeah.
Which is, or the hot term, right, this IP, intellectual property.
Yeah.
How is that different from writing something original?
It's
out of, it's something that's like an original idea.
Right? Yeah, totally. It's an adaptation versus an original.
Yes.
I think what's interesting when you do an adaptation is that, first of all, one thing that's very important to me is being true to the source material.
Mm-hmm.
you should be doing something. You should be adapting something because you love it, not because you hate it and want to fix it. It is my personal take on that. But that said, you also have to exploit what makes a musical great, and really be sure that you know why a particular thing belongs on stage and deserves to sing on stage and needs to sing on stage. Which is why I think a lot of the movie to musical adaptations that we've seen on Broadway haven't worked, because there just was no reason for them to sing in the first place. They're great movies that just should be movies and don't need to be musicals. Right? So I think it's about finding what sings in a project and making sure that you zone in on that. It happens that the particular Goosebumps book that we're adapting, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's Phantom of the Auditorium.
Yeah.
So it's already theatrical in its core. It's about this, phantom that haunts an auditorium. But
isn't that the one where there's like buckets of guts?
No.
I'm thinking of some. I'm thinking
that's like every other Goosebumps book.
That must have been in the TV show. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
Not for that episode.
Maybe I'm sure there was another one with buckets of guts. Anyway,
it sounds like a title.
It's ridiculous. Anyway,
I love Goosebumps. But I mean, so one of the things that we're doing with it is making it such that the play within a play here, it was a play within a book. Now since we're making it into a musical, it would have been a play within a musical. But we're saying, no, let's make it a musical within a musical. Mm-hmm. That just seems to fit. And
right.
It
super meta.
Yeah, right. I mean, but it's actually not a new idea. Like
no.
when you look at musical theater, there are so many musicals about musicals.
Of course.
Which is actually not something that I normally love. Backstage musicals, but this one I think will be great.
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's so any kind of situation where you're doing something, it's so easy to just like sidestep into this like super in jokey world.
Yeah,
of
and
theater.
And that's sort of the thing that I don't respond to in a lot of the.
Comes back to the accessibility thing.
Yeah, exactly. And like when it's also like, what is the substance of the drama? If it's about backstage bickering, that's like not super exciting to me. But this one is like, there might be a ghost haunting us. So it's different.
Yeah.
It's not about the backstage drama. It's about this supernatural paranormal thing that's happening.
Well, it's really well timed with the return of the X-Files and such things. I'm a big X-Files fan, but anyway, just when you say paranormal, that's immediately what comes to mind.
Yeah.
So I mean, again, it's still like early stages, research and stuff. Like, have you started writing stuff? Writing like words or lyric words, writing the words, lyrics and music.
Yeah, I mean, some people call it the words.
Yeah.
There's sort of this debate going on in the community about whether it's music and words or music and lyrics. And
that seems like a silly thing to argue about.
Yeah, it is.
That's how life works.
We like to argue about silly things in musical theater.
Yeah, it's a good thing to sit in a bar and crank about for a while,
right?
When you're not working,
right? Or to put off working.
Yeah, that's probably just as accurate.
It's super accurate.
So, but you've started writing material, like
Yes.
early stages.
Yeah, no, I have started writing some songs for it. I'm working with a guy named John who is doing the book and the lyrics, not the words. I fall on the lyrics side of this.
Last name?
MacLay.
John MacLay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're working together on it. He's basically done a first draft of the book with moments for songs plotted out, and so now we're going back and writing some of those songs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been good. I've been reading some of the books, watching some of the TV shows for ideas. I went to see the movie that just came out this fall.
I heard that was really fun.
Yeah, it was fun. It was cool to see Goosebumps re-envisioned for a 2015 world. Because like the TV show is
super dated,
and it's like almost hilarious to like hear the language that they use and like see the clothes,
Or
and
even
the-
just like, well, that episode that we mentioned with the gods in it. I mean,
Yeah.
the camera that they're using is absolutely ridiculous. You're just,
Yeah.
they're just like this giant thing. And
Yeah, although on some levels that's like a story that couldn't even happen today, because like right now we don't have cameras really. We have cell phones that
Yeah.
have cameras in them. you know?
Yeah.
So like say Cheese and Die would be a different story in 2015.
Completely.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'd find some way to make it awful. But
But yeah, so I mean the movie was interesting to see like how you do Goosebumps 20 years later. Basically.
I would imagine that like would provide you with a lot of ideas, because it was it's a thing that no one was really asking for, but when it came out it was like, oh well, that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I
Thanks,
think
Jack
actually
Black.
people were asking for it because it was like a long time in the making.
Okay.
I mean, they started, I think, trying to make a Goosebumps movie in the '90s, and for one reason
it was
or
just
another,
released
kept getting
without
delayed, and
it was just kind of released without a whole lot of fanfare. I was like, oh, I didn't even know this was coming out.
well, I mean, I think their marketing campaign was really targeted towards a younger audience.
yeah,
so I
that
think
makes sense.
we probably weren't in the bracket that was mostly aware of it. But yeah, it was fun. It was fun, and they also, I think, came up with a creative solution for the problem of like, well, which book do we adapt? They were like, all of them.
Well, because Jack Black played the author, correct?
Yeah,
he was
R.L.
R.L. Stein. Okay, yeah.
And then the basic premise, and I won't give any spoilers away, is that all of the stories come to life, and these monsters basically come to life and haunt this town, and can we get them all back into their books before anyone gets hurt,
Right.
sort of thing. So like that was a way of like incorporating all of the monsters.
Yeah. And so, I mean, but yeah, I'm assuming this is kind of a thing where you're adapting it for a 21st century audience.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you have to.
no high-waisted jeans and hair drapes.
Yeah. There's always sort of 3 time periods that you're aware of when you do an adaptation. There's the time period in which the story is set, there's the time period in which it was written, and then there's the time period today,
Right.
which it's going to be viewed. So it's always sort of a balancing act to determine where something lives tonally.
Well, I mean, and how do you deal with like the idea? I mean, this is something that comes up a lot with musicals, with movies, with television shows. Like, how do you work with being faithful to the book or whatever the source material is,
Yeah.
but also incorporating new ideas that you might have?
I mean, I think it's, again, a balancing act, but it's something that to me is pretty important. And sometimes I will see adaptations where I'm like, what? Why did you change that? You took out my favorite part. Like there's a lot of stuff like that drives me crazy as an audience member.
Right.
Which, I do understand why some of that has to happen.
But some of
especially
the times that you when they do these adaptations, it's a money grab, and they forget why this property spoke to people in the first place.
Right, exactly. So you have to keep track of that. You also have to make sure that the medium in which you're adapting it to makes sense and needs to happen. Like, again, going back to that example of these movies that just don't need to be musicals.
I remember right after I moved to New York, there was, I mean, it only ran for, I think, 3 months, but it was Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
Which I love that movie. I love that movie.
Yeah.
It's such a cool movie.
Well, it was first a book.
Right, of course. Frank Abagnale wrote the
Yeah.
book, and then, it's...
Terrific book and movie. Yeah.
The movies, DiCaprio, Hanks, the John Williams score, very, very underrated John Williams score.
I know, I agree.
But then the musical comes out, and it got like, it was these reviews were saying like, why? I remember like listening to it, and I was like, I really, really love some of the songs from it.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of this, what you're talking, like, what? This was not necessary. I don't know. And this is 10 years after the movie. What's the point?
Yeah, I didn't see it, so I can't totally comment. But I mean, I think it was the team that did Hairspray, and they had this interesting like Frank Sinatra take on the score musically, which I thought was interesting.
And it works really well for some of the songs and less well for some of the others. But.
Yeah. I wish I had seen it. It closed like in the first couple months that I lived in New York. In 2011,
right, yeah,
so
early 2011.
If it had been around a little longer, I probably would have been able to see it.
But anyway, that's just kind of an example of what we're talking about. So, when, do you know, like, have any idea when this whole thing is finished, or like, is it just a long process?
Because this one has a deadline.
Ah, okay.
I mean, as you might imagine, October is sort of a good month to do a Goosebumps production,
of course,
for Halloween. So they want to put this up in time to have it be running in October. I think it may even be starting in September. So we have our work cut out for us in terms of getting it written that quickly and also workshopped and rewritten that quickly. We also have the additional complication, or in some ways benefit, of having it be premiered by 2 theater companies at the exact same time in different parts of the country. So it's being premiered in Milwaukee and Portland, Oregon at the same time. So that's going to be an adventure. That's something I've never done before, and I'm excited to see how it's going to work with like 2 totally different casts doing it at the same time, and 2 different directors and 2 different everything. So that's going to be exciting. It's a quick time period in which to write something, but although actually Fancy Nancy was quicker, that one was like a mad rush to write everything. So this actually feels luxurious compared to that.
So, I don't know how any of this works, but like what, like how does a musical go from that stage to something that might, end up back in New York, which, is convenient for you because you live here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, usually with a musical, you write it, you workshop it, you rewrite it, you reworkshop it over and over again until the point where you can invite some industry and hopefully someone takes a liking to it and goes, yes, I want to do this. They say that from the point where you finish a musical to the time where you can reasonably expect it might be going up in New York is at minimum 5 years.
Yeah.
Usually longer. So that's why, it's really a long gestation period.
Well, yeah.
And that's also honestly the reason why when you talked earlier about like how Rodgers and Hammerstein were churning them out so quickly back in the 50s, like it's because their shows had much shorter gestation periods back then. And it wasn't this whole thing where you had to workshop it a million times for 6 years before it was ready to be on Broadway. They wrote it and they put it up on Broadway. That's how it worked back then.
How convenient. How nice for them.
Yeah. Well, in their case, they were also self-producing some of them, so that helped a little bit. Like there was no one ordering them to rewrite them.
And to be fair, I mean, they're like, if you were to look at the entire history of musical theater, they're the biggest names ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some of their stuff hasn't held up as well in modern times. I will admit, you can't get around that. King and I is super problematic.
But also in some ways super timeless. I mean, there are definitely dated aspects about it. But there are also things where I actually just saw the production at Lincoln Center, and I was like, this like really does still hold up as a great show in 2016. Yeah, there are definitely problems. But
I mean, cultural issues, not so much the music and the story, but
totally. Yeah. Western people funny.
It's pretty racist, but
it's also like treatment of women was sort of.
It's a very strange thing to go back and look at.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of a larger theme in Hammerstein is this sort of interesting question about, like songs like "What's the Use of Wondering If He's Good or If He's Bad? He's your fella and you love him." That's all there is to that. Like that is a tough lyric sometimes to hear now.
Yeah.
But although actually Sondheim quotes that as being like the best Hammerstein lyric ever. So, there's debate about the issue.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. You can debate these things ad nauseum and musical theater nerds have for years,
and we love it.
Yeah, and it's fun. It's always fun to talk about musicals with people who love them. So I mean, do you have anything coming up that people can see where people can see your stuff coming up in the near future?
I mean, if they're in Milwaukee or Oregon.
Well, you're mostly working on that right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do like, Fancy Nancy continues to be produced around the country. It's in a variety of places right now.
You can go online and find that.
Yes.
To the Fancy Nancy, the musical website.
Yes.
Because I've been there.
Yes. Yeah. Or my own website, which has stuff about my other projects. But yeah, and then Yeah, so I guess for New York, my songs are sometimes done in like cabaret style venues, so that they can see that, I guess, if they're in
Well,
New York.
it's a little bit of a different situation for you because if I'm talking to like a band or a solo artist or something like that, they can be like, I'm going to be here on this date, here on this date, here on this date. Here with you, it's like a little bit more vague. Like you've got stuff out there, people are doing it,
right? Well, but, interestingly, it's sort of the difference is becoming less. Like there are a lot of musical theater writers now who also perform their own stuff a whole bunch and sort of make that their thing.
Yeah, a lot of like 54 Below puts on a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah,
if you can afford to get the space.
If you can afford to buy a ticket and meet your meal minimum to go there.
Anyway, let's not talk about that. Don't want to get anyone in trouble.
Right. Yeah. No,
I
actually love 54 Below.
It's a great space.
Yeah.
But anyway, so look forward to Goosebumps coming out and hearing the music from that.
Thank you.
And
maybe the other stuff too. Off the Wall. I think we would love it to eventually have an off-Broadway production. I don't think it's a Broadway show, but I think it could be an off-Broadway show. So that, hopefully in the next couple of years, that's something. I'm also working on another new musical that I unfortunately can't talk about much here by name. But I will say it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. It is another adaptation of a fairly well-known title, and also in the it's also in the very early stages, but it's something that I think is going to be terrific, no matter how long it takes.
Yeah. Well, part of it is just keep continuing to put in the work for as long as you need to.
Yeah.
But so your website is
DannyAbosch.com
and
Abosch is because you probably have no idea how to spell that.
Oh, that's good point.
Abosch.
I've been emailing with you for the past couple of months, so I have it in my head now. I'm like, yes, but yeah, DannyAbosch.com. Check out. You can find the stuff for Fancy Nancy online, but also on Spotify and iTunes if you want to hear his stuff. He's good at what he does. So, Danny, thanks so much for sitting down with me. This has been so much fun.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I love getting to just like sort of geek out a little bit about musical theater. And,
so
about stuff that's not even about myself.
Men are so exhausting, it's really rather sad. They're good for almost nothing, but they're good at being bad. It seems their only purpose is to drive a woman mad.
Their ways are rude and random, I'll never understand them.
They never ask directions, even when they're clearly lost. They always buy those big TVs, no matter what they cost. They leave their things all over the house,
they're always awfully dense.
They walk around without any pants,
and often without any sense. They never notice your hairstyle or say that they like your shoes.
They're crazy about some baseball team, and you better watch out when they lose. They always eat potato chips and spit all over their lap.
They always leave the door wide open whenever they take a... Sorry.
And you know you'll always love them just as much as you can. But there's nothing more annoying than a man. There's nothing more annoying than a man.
Well, this time I agree with you, Joan. Men are a nuisance.
A nuisance is being kind.
Sometimes I think we need to be more firm with them. Show them who's boss.
Ugh, boys will be boys. There is no changing that.
Men are creatures of habit.
Never met a man I could trust. They'll drive you insane, but you're trying in vain. If you ever try to make them civilized like us. They never say they're sorry or admit that they are wrong. They make a lot of promises but never keep them long. They always hog their remote control and most of the bed sheets too.
They're lazy and messy and not very dressy. What is a wife to do?
It's just a fact of life. All the men in the world are rotten. You won't be too surprised when your birthday is forgotten. They're always wearing shirts that don't match and pants that never fit.
You try to do something nice for them and they still make you feel like shit. What?
And you know you'll always love them just as much as you can.